Hi everyone. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to share a story. Please listen it carefully to improve your English. The Last Chance. There was once a young man named Ethan who lived in a small town by the mountains. Ethan was 24 years old, tall, and had kind brown eyes. People in town liked him, but he had one big problem: he never believed in himself. Since childhood, Ethan had loved to paint. He would spend hours sitting by the river, sketching the trees and the birds. When he was 12, he painted a picture of the sunrise over the mountains, and his teacher told him, "You have real talent." But when Ethan grew older, he started to doubt himself. He thought, "I'm not good enough. Nobody will care about my art." He began working at a hardware store to earn money. Every morning, he woke up early and walked to the shop. He would carry boxes, arrange tools, and help customers find nails and paint. It was honest work, but his heart felt empty. He still dreamed of being an artist, but he kept telling himself that he wasn't ready. His best friend, Lucas, often encouraged him. Lucas would say, "Ethan, you have a gift. Why don't you try to share your paintings with the world?" But Ethan would shake his head and answer, "No, I'm not talented enough. I'll fail." One evening, after a long day at the hardware store, Ethan sat alone in his small room. He looked at his old sketchbook on the shelf. Dust covered the cover. He opened it slowly and saw the drawings he had made years ago. As he turned the pages, his eyes filled with tears. He missed the days when he believed in himself. He missed the joy of creating something beautiful. The next morning, something happened that would change everything. Ethan was walking to work when he saw a sign on the community center door: "Art Contest Last Chance to Enter." Under the title, it said, "Open to all artists. Submit your painting by Friday. Winner receives $5,000 and a gallery exhibition." Ethan stood frozen in front of the sign. His heart was beating fast. $5,000? A gallery exhibition? It sounded like a dream. But then, his old thoughts returned: "You're not good enough. You'll embarrass yourself." He took a deep breath and kept walking. But all day, he couldn't stop thinking about that sign. When he lifted boxes, he imagined his painting hanging in a gallery. When he helped customers, he pictured himself shaking hands with other artists. It was as if a voice inside him whispered, "This is your chance." That evening, he called Lucas. "Hey," Ethan said softly. "Do you remember how you always told me to show my art?" Lucas sounded excited. "Yes." "Why?" "There's an art contest. The deadline is Friday." "But, I don't know. What if I'm not ready?" Lucas took a deep breath. "Ethan, you've been waiting for the perfect moment all your life. This is it. You have to try. Even if you don't win, you'll never regret giving your best."
Ethan closed his eyes. He knew Lucas was right. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe he'd never feel ready. But he didn't want to spend the rest of his life wondering what if. That night, he took out his old paints and brushes. His hands trembled as he set up a canvas on his desk. He hadn't painted in years, but as he dipped the brush into the blue color, something inside him felt alive again. He started with a soft outline of mountains, just like the ones he had loved as a child. Then he added a bright sunrise, golden and warm. Hours passed, but he didn't notice. He felt like he was finally himself again. When the painting was done, Ethan stepped back and looked at it. His heart was racing. The picture was simple: a sunrise over the mountains, but it held all his hopes, all his longing, and all his courage. For the next 2 days, he made small changes, adding details and softening the colors. He worked late into the night, forgetting about everything else. Each brush stroke felt like a step toward freedom. On Friday morning, he carefully wrapped the painting in brown paper and carried it to the community center. His palms were sweaty, and he almost turned around 3 times. But finally, he handed the painting to the woman at the desk. "Is this your submission?" she asked kindly. "Yes," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "It's my first time." She smiled. "Good luck. The results will be announced on Monday." As Ethan walked home, he felt lighter than he had in years. He didn't know if he would win, but for the first time in a long time, he felt proud of himself. On Saturday morning, Ethan woke up early. Sunlight was shining through the window, and for a moment, he felt calm. But soon, the doubts returned. What if my painting is the worst one there? What if everyone laughs at me? He tried to push those thoughts away. He made breakfast and cleaned the small kitchen to keep himself busy. But all day, the contest was on his mind. Later that afternoon, Lucas came to visit. He brought a box of Ethan's favorite chocolate muffins. I thought you could use a little celebration, Lucas said with a smile. Ethan shook his head. I haven't won anything yet. That's not the point, Lucas replied. You did something brave. You finally showed your art. That deserves a celebration. They sat on the porch, eating muffins and watching the clouds drift across the sky. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like maybe he deserved a little kindness. On Sunday, Ethan decided to take a walk in the hills behind town. He needed to clear his head. As he climbed the familiar trail, memories came flooding back how he used to come here as a teenager, carrying his sketchbook, dreaming about one day becoming an artist. He sat down on a large rock and looked out over the valley. The river glistened in the afternoon light. Birds flew in gentle circles above the trees. It was so beautiful, and for a moment, he felt peaceful. Maybe I am meant to do this, he thought. Maybe I've wasted too much time being afraid. He closed his eyes and promised himself something. No matter what happens on Monday, I will keep painting. Monday morning finally arrived. Ethan woke before dawn. His heart was beating so loudly, he thought it might burst out of his chest. He tried to eat breakfast, but he couldn't swallow. At 9 o'clock, he put on his cleanest shirt and walked slowly to the community center. As he got closer, he saw a small crowd gathered near the door. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was filled with paintings, landscapes, portraits, colorful abstracts. For a moment, he felt so small and unsure. His painting was at the end of the row, standing quietly among the others. Then he noticed something. Next to his painting was a small white card. His name was written in neat letters, and beneath it were 3 words that made his knees go weak. First place winner. He stood frozen, reading those words again and again. He felt tears fill his eyes. All the fear, all the doubt, all the years he had wasted thinking he wasn't good enough, it all melted away in that moment. The woman from the desk appeared beside him. Congratulations, Ethan, she said warmly. The judges love your painting. They said it was full of heart. Ethan didn't know what to say. His hands were shaking, and he felt like he might cry. He finally managed to whisper, "Thank you," and he stepped outside. Lucas was waiting near the door. Ethan didn't need to say anything. He just held up the card. Lucas's eyes went wide with joy. "I knew it," Lucas shouted, pulling Ethan into a hug. "I told you you were always good enough." People turned to look, but Ethan didn't care. He was laughing and crying all at once. That afternoon, Ethan walked home, holding the winner's certificate carefully in his hand. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt like an artist. The next week was busy. The local newspaper called to interview him. A reporter came to his house, took photos of him holding the painting, and asked about his journey. "What inspired you to paint this sunrise?" the reporter asked. Ethan thought for a moment. Then he smiled. "I think," he said slowly, "I was trying to remind myself that every day is a new chance. Even when you feel lost, the sun still rises." The article came out on Friday. The headline read, "Local artist wins first place after years of doubt." When Ethan saw his picture in the paper, he felt shy but proud. Neighbors he barely knew stopped him on the street to say congratulations. A teacher from his old school sent him a letter saying she had always believed in him. One evening, a woman knocked on his door. She was in her 40s, with tired eyes and a gentle smile. She held the newspaper in her hand. "Are you Ethan?" she asked softly. "Yes," Ethan said. "My daughter loves to draw. She saw your story in the paper and said, if he can do it, maybe I can too. I just wanted to thank you for inspiring her." Ethan's throat tightened. He hadn't expected that his courage might help someone else. He realized that sometimes being brave doesn't just change your life, it can also light a spark in someone else. That night, as he sat by his window, Looking at the stars, Ethan finally understood something important. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. Courage was taking a step forward, even when you were terrified. Courage was believing in yourself when no one else did. Courage was showing the world who you really were. 2 weeks later, Ethan received an official letter from the gallery in the city. The letter invited him to bring more paintings for a small exhibition. When he read it, he couldn't believe his eyes. They want me to bring more paintings. But I only have one finished piece, he thought. He felt that old fear creeping in again. Maybe it was just luck. Maybe they all realize I'm not really talented. But this time, he didn't let the fear stop him. He took a deep breath, set the letter down on the table, and told himself, I have to try. That evening, he called Lucas. They want more paintings for the gallery, Ethan said, his voice shaking. Lucas laughed. That's amazing. See, you're on your way. But I don't have more work to show. Then you'll make more, Lucas said calmly. You have a month. You've been waiting years for this chance. You can't stop now.
The next morning, Ethan cleaned out the small storage room behind his kitchen. He turned it into a studio. The walls were bare, but the sunlight fell perfectly across the table. He set up his easel, laid out his brushes, and pinned blank canvases on the wall. For the first time, he felt like a real artist. Every morning before work, he painted for 2 hours. Every evening, he painted until midnight. His hands were often covered in paint. His back ached from standing so long. But he didn't care. He painted the mountains in every season, green in the spring, gold in the fall, silver with snow. He painted the river he had loved as a boy. He painted the sunrise he had seen so many times but never stopped admiring. Some nights, he felt tired and unsure. What if nobody likes these, he would think. But then he remembered the little girl who had been inspired by his story. He remembered the feeling of finally being proud of himself. And he kept going. At the end of the month, Ethan had 6 finished paintings. They were not perfect, but they were full of honesty and hope. When he stepped back to look at them, he felt something new, something stronger than fear. He felt purpose. On the day of the gallery delivery, Lucas drove Ethan to the city. The car was filled with the scent of fresh paint and the nervous excitement of a dream finally coming true. Do you feel ready? Lucas asked as they stopped at a red light. Ethan smiled. No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's all that matters, Lucas said. The gallery was larger than Ethan had imagined, white walls, polished floors, and bright lights. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes greeted them. You must be Ethan, she said warmly. We're so happy to have your work here. Ethan carried his paintings inside. As he unwrapped each canvas, he felt his heart beat faster. Other artists were hanging their work nearby. Some pieces were abstract, some were detailed, but all were beautiful. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he really belonged there. But then he looked at his own paintings, the mountains, the river, the sunrise, and he remembered how each one had been born from his own struggle and courage. He did belong here. The gallery director shook his hand. We'll hang these tonight, she said. The opening is tomorrow evening. Ethan nodded, feeling both terrified and excited. That night, he could hardly sleep. He kept imagining people walking past his paintings, stopping to look. Would they smile? Would they understand what he was trying to say? But when dawn came, he told himself again, I've done my part. Now it's time to let go. The next evening, Ethan dressed in his best shirt and jacket. Lucas picked him up, and they drove to the gallery. A small crowd had already gathered. People held glasses of sparkling juice and moved slowly from painting to painting, talking in soft voices. Ethan's heart was pounding. He felt like he could hardly breathe. When he stepped inside, the woman with silver hair came over and touched his arm gently. Ethan, come see, she said. She led him to the wall where his paintings were displayed. Beneath them was a small sign that read, Ethan Hall, Landscapes of Hope. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. His eyes blurred with tears. People began to gather around his work. An elderly man with a walking stick pointed at one of the mountain scenes. This reminds me of my childhood, he told his wife. A young woman took a photo of the sunrise painting and whispered to her friend, there's something so peaceful about this. Ethan felt something swell in his chest. For so long, he had believed his art didn't matter. But here were strangers, finding meaning and comfort in his work. A little girl with curly hair tugged her mother's hand and asked, "Mom, did he really paint all these?" Her mother nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, he did." The girl looked up at Ethan and smiled. "They're beautiful," she said simply. Ethan knelt down so he could look her in the eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. For the rest of the evening, people came and went. They asked questions about his process. They told him how his paintings made them feel. And every time someone spoke, Ethan felt the old darkness of doubt growing smaller and smaller. When the evening ended, the gallery director shook his hand again. "Congratulations, Ethan. This is only the beginning." That night, after the gallery event, Ethan stood outside and looked up at the sky. The city lights made it hard to see the stars, but he knew they were there, just like his dreams. Lucas came to stand beside him. "You did it," Lucas said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, and it feels right." They didn't say much more. Sometimes, words weren't needed. In the weeks that followed, something amazing happened. A local art collector bought 2 of Ethan's paintings from the gallery. Then, a school asked him to come and speak to students about his journey. Ethan felt nervous at first. What could he say to inspire young people? But he remembered how lost he had felt for so many years, and how one small act of courage had changed everything. On the day of his school talk, Ethan stood in front of 50 students in a bright classroom. He smiled and began, "I wasn't always sure I could be an artist. In fact, for many years, I told myself I wasn't good enough. I worked in a shop, and every day, I felt like I was hiding who I really was. But then one day, I saw a sign for an art contest. My heart told me to try, even though my head was full of fear. I entered the contest. I won. But more important than winning, I learned that the only thing that had been stopping me was me." The students listened quietly. Some nodded, some smiled, and Ethan saw in their faces the same hope he had once felt. After the talk, a boy with glasses came up to him. "Sir, I love to write stories. But I'm scared they're not good." Ethan bent down a little so they were eye to eye. "I was scared too. But the only way to know is to try. If you don't, you'll always wonder." The boy smiled. "I'll try." That night, Ethan felt something new inside, a sense of peace. He had not only found his own voice. He was helping others find theirs. Months passed. Ethan kept painting. He held a second exhibition, then a third. His style grew stronger. People began to recognize his work, not because it was flashy or perfect, but because it was honest. He moved into a small house at the edge of town, where he could see the mountains every morning. He turned the garage into a bright studio. Lucas visited often. They would drink tea on the porch and talk about life. "You've come so far," Lucas said one evening. "I couldn't have done it without your encouragement," Ethan replied. Lucas shook his head. "No, Ethan. I encouraged you, yes. But you did the hard part. You took the chance. You kept going." One morning, Ethan received a letter from a famous gallery in another city. They invited him to join a group exhibition of landscape artists. He was stunned. It was something he had only dreamed about. He stood by the window, letter in hand, and looked out at the sunrise over the mountains. "I almost missed all of this," he thought. "Because I was too afraid to try." But now he knew. Courage grows with every small step. Final reflection. Years later, when Ethan was well known, a young reporter came to interview him for a magazine. "What advice would you give to someone who has a dream but is too afraid to start?" she asked. Ethan thought for a long moment. "I would say this. Your fear will always tell you to wait. To wait until you're ready, until you're better, until you're sure. But that day never comes. The only way to move forward is to start, right now, just as you are. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being true to yourself."